has a hidden rod. Took a taste and then you spit it back up.
Hello gang, Ruffled Bricks here with the RB Sides, a music review channel dedicated entirely to remix albums and EPs. In this review we're going to be looking at Panda Bear and Sonic Boom's Reset in Dub, a full-length overhaul of their 2022 album Reset by none other than dub legend Adrian Sherwood. This is an album I was very much looking forward to hearing once I first learnt of its existence, as I've been a Panda Bear fan for quite a while, not just due to his work in Animal Collective but also as a result of his solo album Person Pitch. I've also been a fan of Adrian Sherwood ever since I bought his 2003 album Never Trust a Hippie, and I found myself working back through his discography to hear some of the earlier On-U Sound stuff from the 80s, so the prospect of this meeting of minds was very much up my alley. Reset in Dub isn't the first reinterpretation of Reset, as in November 2022 the songbook, instrumentals and remixes edition of the album was released, which included remixes from David Holmes and Voca Gentle. But as Sherwood remixes the album in its entirety, we're going to have a look at this one. Reset came out in July 2022, although it was composed during lockdown from Panda Bear and Sonic Boom sending the parts to each other. Sonic Boom has been a producer on a few of Panda Bear's previous solo albums, including Tomboy and Panda Bear Meets the Grim Reaper. I bought this album at the time and I initially assumed that Sonic Boom got joint billing with Panda Bear just as some kind of formality. But actually, from looking into the album and reading interviews between the two of them, it does seem like it was a very collaborative process between them, even to the point where Sonic Boom wrote some of the lyrics and actually sung some of the vocals in the album as well. Although, as Boom points out in an interview, their vocals do blend together really well, which means that the compliment I was going to give Panda Bear for broadening out his vocal range in this album now no longer applies. Despite Sonic Boom's contributions to previous Panda Bear albums though, the Panda Bear album this resembles the most is 2007's Person Pitch, the album that actually led Sonic Boom to reach out to Panda Bear in the name of collaborating. When I say resembles it the most, I mean compositionally, as much like Person Pitch, this album is predominantly built around samples. In particular samples from 50s and 60s pop and rock songs, so artists like Eddie Cochran, The Trogs, Randy and the Rainbows, Everly Brothers, The Drifters, probably other ones as well, but those are the ones that are listed on Who Sampled. These samples are usually guitar parts from the intros of these songs, and they're basically just looped to form a kind of pulse throughout each track. So in that sense it's very similar to what Panda Bear was doing on Person Pitch with samples from the Tornadoes or Cat Stevens, where Person Pitch tended to add other samples over the top. This album tends to go more with Sonic Boom's trademark selection of synths. There's also fun sound effects here and there. You get this carnival whistle that crops up in a few songs. And also the Thumbs Up Music Modem, a toy keyboard designed to make dial-up modem sounds from the late 90s. Apparently Boom has tried to inflict this upon previous collaborators like MGMT and Beach House to no avail, so it's good that he's finally getting some use out of it. Reset is an album that I enjoyed quite a lot on first listen, but it has shrunk on me a bit on repeat listens. There's still quite a lot I like about the album, but the main issue I have is the energy with the tracks and the way that they're kind of minimal and they don't really develop a huge amount, which definitely seems to be a weakness on some of the longer tracks on the album. Both Panda Bear and Sonic Boom seem to have quite different ways of structuring music. Panda Bear tends to be more of a songwriter, whereas if you listen to Sonic Boom's most recent album, All Things Being Equal, his vocals are more like chants than fully fleshed out songs. So it's very much about repeating a mantra over and over, and that works on All Things Being Equal due to the drony post-rock suites that he's got, which are quite echoey, quite reverb heavy. There's a real sense of drifting in them, whereas here the samples that they're using are a bit more staccato. For example, Go On, which uses a Trog sample of a dang dang. It's a nice rhythmic device, and Boom does add various little pulses and synths over the top in order to flesh the track out, but it just kind of simmers as it goes along. It doesn't really end up burning. These two guitar chords just strummed over and over again sort of start to sound like they're chipping away at your ear after a while. Like, if I was going to compare it to Person Pitch, there's quite a lot of repetition in that album as well, but the songs either tend to have more dramatic changes as they go along, or they tend to finish before they feel like they've run out of ideas. So within this format, it's more tracks like Getting to the Point or Living in the After that I think tend to be more successful, as both of them are under 4 minutes, so they don't really have time to run their course. Or it's tracks at the more, should we say, extreme end of the energy levels of the album that I tend to think work really well. I particularly like In My Body, which is the most low-key of the tracks, I think, energy-wise. It's a lot more spacious than the other tracks, almost a cappella, with a few little synths and a dab of percussion and some sonic slurps added over the top. And at the other end of the scale, you've got Everything's Been Leading to This at the end of the record, which is the most upbeat track, and it's very carnival core. Got these great funfair organs in it and a kind of popcorny synth over the top. It also contains this lovely little drop here and there which contains a yeah! Those little moments of respite there in the track, I think, really help with the structure of it a lot. My main criticism of the album would be the lack of space in a number of the tracks, so they definitely picked the right remixer for this album. Dub producer Adrian Sherwood has been around in the business for over 4 decades now, and his CV is pretty much a sight and sound to behold. Remember tracking down quite a few of those early On-U Sound albums on eBay when I was at uni. Albums by African Head Charge, Creation Rebel, New Age Steppers, Mark Stewart. They've got this real rich, genre-bending, imaginative approach towards dub. Sherwood doesn't appear to have stopped working though, and in the last year he's produced comeback albums for both Creation Rebel and African Head Charge, both of which are worth a listen. This is by no means Sherwood's first full-length reworking of a rock album, however, with probably his most famous one being Echo Deck, his 1997 reworking of Primal Scream's Vanishing Point, and as recently as November 22 he did a full-length reworking of Lucifer on the Sofa by Spoon, which is titled Lucifer on the Moon. I initially assumed this album was just going to be reworked using elements from the original, much like all the previous Sherwood remixes I can remember hearing, so I was actually delighted to hear that he'd actually brought a whole bunch of musicians on board to help rework this one. 2 of the names listed were no surprise to me at all, given that they are Doug Wimbish and Skip MacDonald, who've both worked with Sugar Hill Gang and Grandmaster Flash and the Furious 5, but also they've worked on numerous On-U Sound records over the years. The collaboration list that's been circulated around across various websites also includes such names as Prisoner, Alex White, Horseman, Mark Bandola, Crucial Tony, Raz Bad Things, Ivan Cello Man Hussey, and Matthew Smythe. Sadly, there doesn't appear to be a full breakdown of what each of these members did on the album, but there's little clues dotted around in places like Discogs or in various reviews or bits of promo. Although that said, I couldn't find anything out about Raz Bad Things, and Prisoner seems to be an alias of Adrian Sherwood himself, so don't know if that's just the moniker he goes under when he plays metal bars or something. Basically though, what you get is a fully reworked dub reggae versions of every single track from Reset. So each track gets nice additional elements like percussion, bass, horn section, saxophone, a cello, and also the classic reggae siren. The tracks in Reset in Dub are laid out in the exact same order as they are in the original album, which isn't always a beneficial move in my experience. I feel like original albums have a certain structure to them, and once you start messing around with the songs on them, it doesn't always lend that putting them in the same order will work as well. Though that said, I think the track order largely works on this one, in part because it seems to be split into 2 different styles. The first 4 tracks go with a standard dub reggae style, but then tracks 5 to 7 actually start interpolating more elements from digidub and ska, before going back into down-tempo reggae mode for the last 2 tracks. I will say though that as far as song structure goes, the first track on the album is probably the least representative of how Sherwood and co work with the vocals, or even the samples for that matter, as the Getting to the Point dub basically does away with the sample of Eddie Cochran's 3 Steps to Heaven that underpins the original. The vocals are also largely absent, with only a couple of remnants of the chorus fit into the latter part of the track. What you get instead is this wonderfully vibrant horn section and a classic reggae bass line. But yeah, it's strange to me how so much of the original song is left on the cutting room floor for this one, particularly given how most of the remaining tracks try and stick to the song structure of the originals. With Go On dub, this works particularly well, starting with a kind of low drone and a very light shuffling beat. It gradually sort of brings in the elements of the song around it, even using the Trog sample to create a much more pleasing stab than the original. They're also bolstered by a couple of bursts from the horn section. The synths from the original are brought up in the mix as well, which is a very nice melodic touch. But yeah, this one has a sense of space that the original lacks, and I think this one does real wonders with the source material. Edge of the Edge also benefits from this remix style. It keeps the original choral loop from Randy and the Rainbow's Denise, but it really nicely brings it up and down in the mix throughout the track. I really like the way as well, as the song goes along, they start taking parts of the vocal out, which very much gives the backing do-do-do-dos a chance to shine on their own. There's also a nice burst of guitar in the middle that wouldn't sound out of wave in an 80s new wave song, and the thumbs up modem sounds are very much still intact, which is very welcome. What's really nice with this album is how some of the more overtly electronic elements of the originals blend with Sherwood's remakes. The original version of Everyday has this organ in it, for example, which in the Everyday dub version, it's kind of cut up into this bleepy shimmer across the track. There's also this strange vocoder sound effect in the background, which sounds like it could be on the percussion or the vocals, I'm not quite sure. But it's also not a million miles away from some of the sound effects that Sonic Boom brings to proceedings, so it's quite difficult to discern where the sound comes from. I'd say the Digiscar section that I mentioned earlier is probably the weakest part of this remix album. The exception I'd say is Whirlpool dub, which I think must have been deduced to be the highlight of the album, given that they did a video of a dancing mirrorball person for it. The original is based on Sonic Boom's own Things Like This, a little bit deeper, and for me it's another example of where Sonic Boom's compositional style doesn't necessarily gel quite so well with Panda Bear's songwriting style. The 6-bar structure of the main vocal refrain robs the track of some breathing room, which makes it a bit wearing over its 5-minute runtime. Whirlpool dub very much gives the track the space that it needs, giving it a much floatier beat that reminds me of maybe early 90s Andrew Weatherall, and also some cello, which is a gorgeous unexpected addition to the track, or at least unexpected if you didn't look at the cast list and see there was someone called Cello Man on there. However, I'd say the remix of In My Body is slightly less successful, given that it was already a pretty spacious track in and of itself. I think it has a decent stab at trying to fit the track into a digidub framework, and the synths from the original fit really nicely into the new composition, but I'm just not really convinced that the vocals fit that well over the new beat that has been composed. And as much as I like the use of saxophone throughout most of these tracks here, on this particular one it does get a little bit Kenny G at points. The one remix that doesn't work at all for me though from this central section is Danger Dub, which is unfortunate as it's also the longest remix on the entire album. Although the original Danger is another overlong track, I do really like the way they use the Everly Brothers sample in it. Some of the builds and drops on this one are a bit more fluid than the others, and I like the more intimate emotional quality that this one provides. Danger Dub pretty much does away with all of that. The song structure more or less gets thrown out completely, with the first verse not coming in until 3 minutes in, so you just get fragments of the main vocal up until that point. I like the driving beat that underpins this one, however, there's this kind of stuttering effect on the horns in the first section of the song that gives it a kind of mosquito-like quality. It just feels like you're being bothered by an insect, and I don't find that enjoyable. Still, that's better than what happens in the second half of the remix. Just as the song feels like it's about to get going, it slows down entirely to a stop, and then the song just plays at a much slower rate, with all the downward pitch shifting you would expect from such a change. Sherwood puts this effect on Panda's vocals that makes him sound like a smash alien. Although the horns do start sounding quite nice around this part, I don't really think it works. It just feels a bit forced and lifeless, especially right at the end when it sounds like a concussed children's choir doing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Fortunately, the last two remixes are pretty decent. The original version of Living in the After has quite an extensive usage of Save the Last Dance for Me by the Drifters, with its big joyful string section helping provide a nice up and down trajectory in the track in accompaniment to the opening guitar sample. Sherwood's version ditches the string sample, which is probably for the best. I can't really imagine how it would fit in with a reggae song. Instead, he once again brings his own cello man to the proceedings to add his own strings, as well as a quite mournful sounding melodica section towards the end, which I think really gives the track a different edge to the upbeat original. I think rhythmically the lack of drop before the chorus comes in is possibly a bit of a blemish, giving the rhythm more of that consistent driving quality that many of the originals have. But I think this is a decent alternative take to one of my favourite tracks from the original. The final remix on this album, Everything's Been Leading to This dub, I did initially think was a bit of an anticlimax compared to the original, but each time I listen to it, it grows on me a bit more. It definitely seems to have the weightiest beat out of any of the tracks here. And in terms of the elements, Sherwood pretty much throws everything at this track. You've got the cello, you've got guitar, got the reggae chords in there, possibly played on piano. Lovely little bits of percussion here and there, and then they add the sugary organ from the original. And towards the end he just starts throwing everything around with loads of effects, loads of whooshes, loads of reverb, just pure chaos. Until it all eventually subsides and we're just left with a loose bit of the vocal. I really like the way the album ends on the phrase "we're skidding through a closing door" as well. That's a really nice touch.
We're skidding through a closing door.
So yeah, that is Reset in dub. Personally, I think it's a wonderful reworking of Panda Bear and Sonic Boom. Favourite remix here would be Go On dub. I just think the elements are teased out a lot better in this version of the track than in the original. Least favourite remix, probably unsurprisingly, is Danger dub. I guess they probably dodged a bullet by trying not to make it compare to the original, but they kind of took another bullet in the same move, so it didn't really work out. Is this remix album better than the original? Kinda. I think the dub style Sherwood goes with here definitely helps out on some of the longer, more repetitive tracks. With some of the shorter, more overtly poppy tracks, or maybe the most spacious track on the album, it doesn't quite feel as confident in how it handles the elements there. Overall though, I really like this album, very much a worthwhile accompaniment to the original. Thanks for watching this review. Please do subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more reviews of remix albums and EPs. If you have any suggestions of any remix records you'd like me to review, then do let me know in the comments below. Also, if you have any strong opinions or even lukewarm opinions on which of the two versions of this album is better, then do let me know. This review is over.